All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the last in our series of risk management webinars for specialty crop producers through the Idaho Farmers Market Association. We will go ahead and get started. So today's webinar is focused on food preservation, both for sales at market and also for your personal use and for your family. We thought it was a good idea to do some updates around some of the questions that we've been seeing and receiving over the season, and just a really fun harvest wrap up to the end of the summer. So I'm Ariel Agenbroad. I'm a University of Idaho Extension small farms educator. I'm also the current treasurer of the Idaho Farmers Market Association, and I've been leading a lot of the educational aspects of this specialty crop block grant that we've had over the past year. My other guest presenter today is my colleague here at University of Idaho Extension, Bridget Morrisroe Miller. She's a family and consumer sciences educator, and one of her many tasks and talents is focused on food safety in home food preservation. And I also want to thank Melissa Napton, who has been working with us very closely on these specialty crop block projects over the past year. She has a farm, Bluebird Acres, 10 Bluebird Acres, and is also the manager of the Kuski Farmers Market. So a lot of hats that she wears in addition to another full-time job. So just a little brief reminder about the Idaho Farmers Market Association. We are a statewide member-based association that's created to bring together resources and expertise from around the state to help farmers markets in Idaho thrive. We recently this year adopted a beautiful new logo, and we're in the process of updating our website too to reflect this new brand and this new energy. If you're not already a member of the Idaho Farmers Market Association, there are many reasons why you might want to consider joining. It's fairly affordable. It's based on a sliding scale of the size of your market. But some of the benefits, you get your market listed in our IFMA searchable map online. You have the opportunity to receive mentoring and support from us, from our contractors, from our board members, and from our network of farmers markets. We really focus in on providing technical assistance and support to markets that want to offer SNAP benefits or food stamps at their market or double up food bucks. When possible, we have funding available to support some of these programs through our grants and fundraising, and we can really help you to find that on your own as well. We do annual trainings for our market managers. In the past few years, we've been pairing up with a number of regional market associations to offer kind of a regional boot camp, and we'll be doing that again in 2025. We have a special market managers Facebook group where you can vent your concerns and find answers from others who are in the same boat as you. Vendors are welcome to join that group also. We do really try when we can and when we have the ability to provide mentoring and ongoing support for markets at any stage of their development. We have a lot of connections through the other organizations that serve on our board and our partners around the state. And we really try to work to promote all farmers markets, whether you're a member or not, through our social media outreach and advocacy. And then Idaho Farmers Market Association members have the opportunity to join Fair Idaho as a market at a special membership rate. So lots of things, and there's always new benefits being added to this list. So you can join us. I would wait to join us actually right now if you haven't yet, because we will roll over our membership starting in next spring, and then you would be paying twice. But it's really easy to join. You just go to our website, idahofma.org/join us, to find out about the sliding scale and when you might want to join. Typically, our markets are joining January through March. We try to kind of keep that window a little bit tight so that we know when we've got everybody. So this webinar is part of a project funded by the Specialty Crop Block Grant from the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. We've been doing a number of activities through this grant, from webinars to mini grants to our markets, to promoting specialty crops through social media and paying for those booths. And that's where Melissa has really been coming through and promoting all of those specialty crops that we produce in Idaho and sell at farmers markets. So a quick update on what's coming. we were able to receive an extension on our funding that's going to take us through early spring, summer 2025. And so we are going to have some of that specialty crop advertising money still available to share with you all. So watch for some information about that. There is going to be funding available. And then many of you might have received that University of Idaho publication, the recipe book, Market Fresh in a Snap. We have received funding to do a second, much larger printing of that. Some of you have requested more copies and we didn't have them, but we are getting those printed this fall. And so we'll be able to start shipping those out so you can have a big stack of them or even a box if you want to distribute at your market in the 2025 market season. And a reminder, these were all fresh prep recipes based on local produce, and people have really been loving those. But let's get started on today's webinar because I have some slides to share with you, and Bridget has quite a bit prepared too, and we want to make sure that we get through all of it. So thank you for joining us if you're joining us live, and if you're watching this recording, we really hope that if you have any questions, you'll reach out to us and let us know, but just enjoy this content. So when we were thinking about putting this together, we were thinking about the bounty of the harvest and how many of us that have market gardens or even large home gardens might find ourselves at the end of the season with more than we know what to do with, right? More than we can eat at once. Your markets might be ending now and your garden is saying, I'm not done. So we often think about food preservation as a way to not lose all that investment in time, energy, resources, and food. So a lot of different reasons why we might want to preserve and why we might be interested in today's presentation, right? We might have an overabundance at our season's end. You might be finding that your market has a demand or an opening for more value-added products. You know, maybe there aren't any people selling jams or jellies or other products at market, and you've got an opportunity. You might be looking for a way to have shelf-stable products for winter markets or bazaars. A lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but several of our farmers markets do continue on through the winter, either, you know, all the way through to Christmas, or maybe there's a pop-up here or there that's kind of serving that winter market. And having shelf-stable products would be really nice. You just grab them and go. Maybe you don't have a greenhouse, so you don't have produce in the winter. And then, you know, from my standpoint, so we can continue eating our delicious produce. You know, I love buying produce at farmers market to preserve for my own family if my garden doesn't have enough. So how do we preserve, right? There's lots of ways that we can preserve food for sale or for personal consumption. The ones that we are going to briefly touch on today and the ones that are really relevant to our presentation are going to be canning, both high acid and low acid. We're going to talk about that. Freezing, drying, and by drying, we mean dehydrated or freeze dried. And we're going to talk about the different layers of complexity or the different regulations that surround these different methods. And if you are not aware yet, we'll kind of give you an update on that. So where do we find answers? So two resources that I relied on heavily when I am answering these questions or when I was putting together this presentation. One is the publication from the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. That's the one here on the left, Starting a Craft Food Business in Idaho. And if you take a snapshot of that QR code, it's going to take you right to that publication. And this is really the guidebook for small food business entrepreneurs in Idaho wanting to create a business around a specialty food. And so this is a great place to start. The resource on your right is Cultivating Your Business. This is a guide for small and direct marketing farms in Idaho. This is put together through University of Idaho through our Cultivating Success program. And it includes really all the guidelines, rules, and regulations that need to be considered by any small and direct marketing farm. And it does include producing value-added products. So there's that QR code. And while these are both really great resources, the bottom line comes down to Idaho Health and Welfare and their food safety and food protection program. This is where you're going to find the Idaho Food Code, and the Idaho Food Code is really what regulates all processed foods in the state. So if you have a question that is not answered here on this webinar or anything comes up in one of the two aforementioned resources, like I said, the last word and the bottom line is going to be through health and welfare and their food protection program. So here's their website, and there's a QR code that can take you right there. And we're going to refer back to them a couple times in this presentation. So a little bit more about this, right? It gets complicated. And those of you that have been in this business for a while probably have experienced different levels of frustration or have really realized how complicated this can be, especially when health inspectors come to your market. And that's because we have one food code, but we have 7 health districts, and each health district interprets and implements the food code. And so they're not going to all be exactly the same. And sometimes we run into just some differences in the way that this rule is administered or interpreted around the state. Most of the markets that I talk to generally have a good relationship with their health district. You know, sometimes it takes a little give and take on both sides. Sometimes it really means reaching out as a market or as a vendor and taking that first step. You know, these folks are here to help you. They want you to be successful. They also have to follow the food code and their guidelines, and it can be sticky. So I just encourage you to establish a relationship with your health district and with your environmental specialist that's part of this. And in some districts, we've got the same people that are there for a really long time, and we have great relationships. In other districts, sometimes there's a lot of turnover, and then it's part of, you know, kind of educating that new person as to how farmers markets work and what you're looking for in terms of service and the kinds of questions that you as a manager or as a vendor might have. So here's just this again, this list is generated from the website that I shared in the last slide, and you want to familiarize yourself with the health district that serves your county where you live. So when we talk about entry-level food production, right, in Idaho, we're typically talking about cottage foods. And that's because cottage foods are, and this is really pretty special. This has not been forever that we've been able to do this. Cottage foods have been codified into the food code now, and so it's really pretty clear as to what is allowed and what is not allowed and how. But as a definition, I'll talk about more in a minute, but cottage foods are foods that are allowed to be produced that do not require time or temperature control for safety. And so they're viewed as more of a low-risk food and less likely to carry, contain, or spread pathogens that cause foodborne illness. So these foods are typically referred to as non-TCS, right, because they don't require time or temperature control. Cottage food operations in Idaho are allowed to distribute these food items directly to a consumer without any regulatory oversight. Now, this is huge, right? This means that these foods can be produced at a home kitchen. They can be sold directly to a consumer, and they are not going to receive an inspection or any real, regulatory interference. But it is only the non-TCS foods, and it is only foods that have been deemed to be allowable under cottage food regulations. And directly to a consumer, that can be at a farmer's market, that can be person to person, that can be online, as long as the food is going directly from the producer or the maker of that food to the consumer. Cottage foods cannot be distributed to a retail market, right? So you cannot take your cottage foods to, a farm stand that is not your own, or to a grocery store and have them sold there. There is one caveat though, right? Cottage food products must include a label or a placard at the sales location that provides contact information for you and your operation and clearly states that this food was prepared in a home kitchen that is not subject to regulation and inspection by the regulatory authority, and that it may contain allergens. It's a really good idea to list any possible allergens on your food products just to protect you and to protect your consumer. But this is the base requirement, right? So this is like the least that you can do. You can always do more, and that might be a good idea to look into. So what are some allowable non-TCS foods that are included in the cottage food rule? All right, so here is the list. Baked goods that do not require refrigeration, fruit, jams and jellies, honey, fruit pies, breads, cakes that do not require refrigeration, right? So these are cakes that do not have butter or cream cheese based frostings or cream fillings that are, going to need refrigeration, pastries and cookies that do not require refrigeration, candies and confections that do not require refrigeration. We got a theme going there. Dried fruits, dried herbs, seasonings and mixtures, cereals, trails mix and granola, nuts, vinegar, popcorn and popcorn balls, and tinctures that don't make any medicinal claims. Now, the ones that are the focus of today's presentation are really fruit jams and jellies, these dried herbs, dry fruits, and possibly vinegar. And I'm going to put another star by dried fruits because I'm going to talk about that really quickly. So dried fruits must have a natural pH below 4.6. Examples of these include apples, apricots, berries, grapes, peaches, and plums. And Bridget might talk specifically about apples. There is some new research that is showing that apples, modern varieties of apples may be pushing that pH envelope a little bit and may need to be acidified. So again, this is the rule right now, but it's something that you might want to discuss with your health district. Any finished product will need to be evaluated for pH and water content to confirm that they are non-TCS. So if you're thinking of doing a dried fruit product, it's a really good idea to start working out these details and work hand in hand with a health district representative ahead of time, so that you know that your food has been cleared and you are ready to go and sell it, and someone doesn't show up and say, hey, by the way, I've got a meter here and I'm going to check your pH. Nobody wants that surprise. So drying fruits, it's recommended that they should not be done in a homemade unit or a sun drying unit, that they should be done in a commercial mass-produced unit. So again, this can include, a dehydrator that you buy off the shelf at Walmart, just maybe not out in the sun drying because of the risk of, adulteration with insects and other contaminants. And sometimes homemade units may not be as effective and may not dry fruit as effectively. So just some things to think about. A big question that we get often is about pickles, and the answer is no. And every way that you ask that question, the answer is probably still going to be no. And that's because acidified food, so anytime we are adding acid to a non-acidified food, it does not mean the definition of a non-time and temperature controlled food. So this includes low acid canned foods. So if there's canned fruits that are not a high enough acid fruit, any canned vegetables, any canned meats, and pie fillings fall into this category. Fermented foods like cheese and yogurt, you certainly, that would not fall under cottage foods. And here's one that I think really rubs people the wrong way sometimes, because this is a great way to use up our extra produce. There's a high demand for these products. But cottage food rule does not include pepper jellies, pickled products, and canned salsa. Now, you can sometimes make salsa fresh at market and sell it, or if you have access to another facility. But if you want to produce any of the above listed products, you must do it in a commercial kitchen rather than at home. And I can't have that discussion with you. That is something you've got to talk about with your health district. But this is the rule as it is currently written. So perhaps you have a great idea for a cottage food. You've gone through the rules. You see that it's allowable. And so you sign up to sell at the local farmer's market, and your market says, no, you cannot sell that food here. And you're like, well, what gives? Well, while Idaho law does not require cottage food producers to obtain a food establishment permit or to, create some of these foods in a commercial kitchen, any sales venue has the right to establish their own rules and policies that go above and beyond that or supersede the cottage food rule. So they may require you to prepare foods in a licensed kitchen or to show that you have consulted with the district and completed a cottage food assessment. So it is not required to do the cottage food assessment to sell cottage foods under the rule, but your venue, your market, your bazaar, wherever you're selling, may actually require that. All right. So if that is the case, what is the cottage food assessment? Well, it's on their website. It's basically an assessment for you and for the health district to determine and to confirm that the food product that you want to produce does in fact conform with cottage food rules, and that is in fact a safe and non-time temperature controlled food. And this is a great idea. We really encourage everyone to do this, even if it is not required, because it's just a great way to safeguard, and you have that assurance that your food has been checked out. If anyone questions it, you can provide them with the assessment, and you might learn something along the way, right? Anytime we dig deeper into the science of food safety and food preservation, we're learning something. So you can download this online, fill it out, and submit it to your health district, and there is no fee associated with this, right? So, I mean, I guess the worst that could happen is they could say no, but if they say no, and you were producing this food, chances are someone was going to find out anyway. So it's a good idea to do it. All right, so if you want to go a little bit above and beyond, right? So like I said, the food safety, the cottage food assessment is not required to sell cottage food under the rule. However, if your market demands it, or if you really want to be sure that you're producing the best thing that you can, it's a good idea to do it. But you can go beyond as well. So you might want to consider taking a food handler or food safety course just for your own knowledge, and just so that you feel like you are creating the very best product in the very safest environment that you can, especially if you're doing this out of a home kitchen. These courses are not required, of course, but they can be very helpful to ensure food safety and to ensure that those best practices are being followed. And if you ever decide that you want to start advancing beyond your home kitchen, right? Like there's only so much you can fit in your oven. At some point, you might want to take the next step. Having this training and these certifications might help make that change or that advancement go even quicker. So the Idaho Food Safety Manual, the Idaho Food Safety Exam, and also the Temporary Food Establishment Exam can all be found at the Department of Health and Welfare's website at this address. Both exams are free. The Temporary Food Establishment Certificate is good for 1 calendar year. This is probably more suited to like those folks that have a food truck or a food stand, or maybe they're preparing food on site at farmers market to sell. But it could be a good thing for you to explore as well. That one is good for 1 calendar year. It expires in December. So if you take it now and pass it, it'd be good until December 31st. You'd have to take it again in January to have it go through the next year. But the General Food Safety Exam will provide you with an Idaho Food Handler Certificate, and that is valid for 5 years. So again, this is just if you want to increase your knowledge and increase your kind of your level of proficiency around food safety. All right, so let's say that you know that a product that you are producing is safe, that it really meets the definitions, but it's not on the list of those cottage foods. What can you do? Well, you might have a couple of different recourses. I'm not going to promise you that you're going to be successful or that this is going to be totally fine, but here's what you can do. So you can engage a private laboratory to test your product to demonstrate that your pH is there, that your active water content is in the right zone, and to really assure that it is a non-time temperature control for safety food. This also includes demonstrating that the pH of the product is below 4.6, or that the product has a water activity level below 0.85. So even if you do this and you've got the documentation and the proof, this may not make them non-TCS, or they might be non-TCS, but this doesn't necessarily guarantee that they'll qualify as a cottage food product or be approved by the health district. But it's a way to work on this, and that would, again, it really requires a relationship with your health district, working with them on this. I would probably reach out to them first and say, I want to do this testing. What do you recommend? A lab? What are the chances of this food getting approved as a non-TCS cottage food? But go there. And then if you really want to produce this food and it turns out that you can't do it in a home kitchen, reach out to us at University of Idaho Extension. Reach out to the health district. We can provide you with some resources for commercial kitchens, whether it's through our university system or otherwise. There are other ways that you can produce a food that would be legal and safe for sale. All right, so those were all of my slides. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Bridget pull up hers. And now is the part that I like best, because I love learning about food preservation and keeping up to date on the safest practices and principles And that's where she's going to take us next.
Thanks, Ariel. I'm going to see if I can share now. It looks like I can. Okay, are you able to see just my one screen?
I'm still seeing the slides on the side.
Okay. Now, can you see just the one screen?
That looks great. Take it
Great.
away.
Great. Thanks, Ariel. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Again, my name is Bridget Morrisroe Miller, and I'm a family consumer science educator with the University of Idaho. And one of the programs I lead is the Master Food Safety Advisor Program. It's a long-standing program with the University of Idaho that works with consumer home food preservation. So as Ariel said, and why she had me come and talk to you today, is the cottage food industry does fall under home food preservation, and that is the area in which I teach. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about food preservation and safety. So today the objectives I have are to define food preservation with you, give an overview of the different methods of food preservation, explain low acid versus high acid foods, and then also identify research-based information and resources for you so that when you go to do this, you'll have those valid and reliable sources of information. So starting, let's talk about what food preservation is. So here's two different definitions that I found. Food preservation is any number of methods by which food is kept from spoilage after harvest or slaughter. Food preservation can be defined as the process of treating and handling food in such a way as to stop or greatly slow down spoilage and prevent foodborne illness while maintaining nutritional value, texture, and flavor. Both these are correct, but a little bit more about food preservation, the history of it. Why we began home food preservation was to help home consumers and families across the US create a year-round supply of food. Nowadays, we have a lot more ways to have access to healthy, fresh food that we didn't used to have 100 years ago. So present day, a lot of people that are doing home food preservation are really trying a couple things. They're trying to optimize nutrition, get that summer harvest in the middle of winter. They also want variety. Maybe they can't find what they want in the store. So if they can do it themselves safely at home, they'll do that. A lot of individuals are also trying to control added ingredients, reduce their salt, reduce their sugar, maybe preservatives. We have a lot of people that have allergens, as Ariel mentioned in your labeling of your home canned product or home food preserved product. It's good to put in there what it may contain. And for some individuals, preserving at home can save money. There's an asterisk next to this because it really depends. I would say some methods of home food preservation can be cost effective, others might not. And depending on what kind of equipment and access to produce, a lot of you guys as food producers might have access to low cost produce. For other individuals, if they have to go buy that produce, if they don't grow it themselves, it could actually be a little more expensive. If you look here at this picture down on the right, this is kind of the history of food preservation. Extension has been involved in teaching home consumers how to preserve food for over 100 years. If you see down here, this was a 4-H club. That's how we started. We tried to teach adults, but they wouldn't come. So we started teaching youth, and then they taught their parents how to preserve food at home and how to really get the research information we were developing into the homes, and this is how we did it. So really, when we talk about food preservation, we're talking about controlling bacteria growth. And we do that in a couple different ways. We heat, through the canning process and cooking process. It kills vegetative cells. It might pasteurize or sterilize the food as well. In cold storage, we use cold temperatures to prevent or reduce growth. And we also do drying, acidifying, adding preservatives, and vacuum packaging. All these methods are things we're doing in food preservation and preparation to really control bacterial growth. Preserving, home preserving, and even in commercial preserving, it encompasses both food safety and food quality. So we're looking at two things. We're really determining, is this food safe? Is it unsafe? Is it at risk for causing illnesses? And we're also looking at, is it unusable? Has it deteriorated where the quality has become undesirable? And from a nutrition standpoint, maybe doesn't have very good nutrition. We also, my screen advanced here. We're talking about, I always tell people with food preservation that it doesn't increase the quality of the food. It just keeps it at the quality it's currently at, and it slowly deteriorates. So really stopping it from deteriorating. So you really want to start with quality produce. It should be fresh, firm, free from any type of spoilage or mold or cuts. And we really don't recommend using bruised produce unless you're going to use it for like jams or jellies or fruit leather. But in other processes, it'll just become mushy and it'll break down even more. The different types of home food preservation include canning, which is, there's two types: boiling water canning, that's for high acid foods and also foods that have been acidified through fermenting and pickling. Then there's pressure canning, which is for low acid foods, and I'll cover what that means. You can also dry food using dehydrators, ovens, solar, the sun, microwave. We don't really recommend microwaving because it can burn the food, but some things can be dried that way. Also includes salting and smoking, primarily meats, and then freezing. Cold storage and freeze drying fall under freezing. So looking at the canning methods, we have the boiling water canning method, which is for acid foods or foods that have been acidified. This is a method where the temperature doesn't reach higher than 212 degrees, about 209 degrees Fahrenheit here in the Treasure Valley. And then there's pressure canning, which is for low acid foods, and the temperature exceeds that 212. It reaches up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's very important that we use pressure canning when we're using low acid foods, because there is a risk for Clostridium botulinum and the toxin. If we do not reach the time and temperature of 240 degrees, then we are not going to be able to inactivate. We may actually activate and cause botulism toxin. So it's very important with low acid foods that we reach that 240 critical point to inoculate those spores. With boiling water, where we reach the 212, 209 degrees Fahrenheit here in the Treasure Valley, we're really looking at things like molds, E. coli, salmonella. Those things can remain in acidic foods, but if we reach that time and temperature of 209 degrees for the required amount of time, we can also reduce or kill that bacterial growth. So when we're looking at high versus low acid foods, and I know Ariel mentioned this in the cottage food industry market, why they say that foods that are 4.6 or lower are able to be produced in the cottage food industry. It's because they're considered low acid and there's not as high a risk. With low acid, they're at the 4.7 or higher on the pH scale, and they are at higher risk and must be pressure canned. So when you're looking at the scale, for those that are 4.6 or lower, tomatoes are right on the borderline, which we'll talk about that. Primarily, we're looking at all fruits, jams, juices, acidified products such as tomatoes or salsas, and pickled products where acid has been added through fermentation or the adding of vinegar, lemon juice, those type of things to bring the acidity level up. Those can all be processed in the boiling water canner. Things with a 4.7 or higher pH must be pressure canned, and we're looking at our meats, our vegetables, or combinations thereof. Some things that we don't recommend for canning, if you look over on the left here, are bananas, melons. Those things do not hold up well, and they also have borderline pH. There's a couple other fruits, such as persimmons, Asian pears, white flesh nectarines. Those are also on the borderline pH level, so they are not allowed to be boiling water canned. So talking about tomatoes, and Ariel alluded to, we're now seeing this with apples. However, the USDA has not come out with recommendations yet on apples. The new Ball Blue Book has. So right now we're not acidifying apple products unless you're following the new Ball Blue Book recipes. But what happened in the 1980s, we were seeing incidents of botulism poisoning with people consuming home canned tomato products. So the research field and scientists across the US said, what's going on? We've never had an issue with tomatoes and botulism because they were too acidic. Well, they went and they did tests on a variety of different tomatoes across different varieties, different temperatures, different areas of the country. And what they found is that the pH level of tomatoes had changed. It used to always be below 4.6, and they were finding a range of anywhere from 4.4 up to almost 5.0 pH level, which meant that they were no longer acidic enough to prevent botulism. So what they did is they created recipes with acidification. So now you have to add acidity, either bottled lemon juice, citric acid, or vinegar with a 5% acidity level. If you see on this picture here, you must check for that in order to bring the acid level up to safely boiling water canned tomatoes. I'm often asked, why don't you just pressure can tomatoes? And to that response, I tell them, well, one, we don't have any tested and valid recipes to know how to do that to prevent botulism. And two, I think most people would not be happy with the product they would get from pressure canning, as it would probably make the tomatoes and the salsa very mushy and not quite what you would expect. The other method is drying. This is one of the oldest methods of food preservation that we have. It is an alternative to canning or freezing, and it can be the least expensive method. But keep in mind, as Ariel said, in the cottage food industry, you are not allowed to do solar drying. You must use a commercially produced unit, such as the one in the middle here, which is a commercial home dehydrator. So when they say commercially produced, it means you can't make your own or put together a screen that's safe and put it outside. They want you to use a commercially produced home dehydrator that can dehydrate foods. And there's different sizes, different methods. The larger ones, like the one here, the Excalibur, is one of the largest dehydrators that's out there for home consumers on the market, and it can dehydrate quite a bit of food. So really keep in mind, if you're going to take these to market, what size of dehydrator you need. What we're looking at when we're drying food in home food preservation is that water activity level, as Ariel mentioned that as well. So we really have to know when our food's dry. So we're really looking at that 0.85. Foods need to be below the 0.85. So we're reducing the water available for microorganisms to grow. So if you look at the scale where cornflakes, something very, very dry, is a 0.3, clear up to toast is about where we're wanting foods to get dry enough. And if you see, bacon's on there as well. It's a cured meat and it has salt, which also binds the water. So it's a little bit different, but we're really looking at water activity of below the 0.85. Freezing is another method of food preservation. And what we're seeing in freezing, much like with other methods, is we're slowing down the enzymatic action. So the minute you harvest fruits, vegetables, animal products, enzymes start to break down. So we're trying to stop that enzymatic action. We can't stop it, but we can slow it down. In freezing, meats and fruit tend to hold up the best with this type of food preservation. With vegetables, we blanch most vegetables. The blanching actually preserves the color, the flavor, and the texture. But do note with freezing, there is going to be texture changes because as the food freezes, the food expands with ice crystals. So frozen products don't always thaw and come out like you expect them to. And also keep in mind, a lot of people ask me, what's best, canned, frozen, or dried? They've done commercial studies and they've actually found that frozen foods sometimes have the highest nutrient content. It's not a huge difference, but it is a little bit higher. So sometimes freezing can actually preserve the best nutrients because we're able to harvest the food and freeze it quickly right at its peak of nutrient level. So some general freezing instructions is, remember, with any form of home food preservation, it doesn't improve the quality. So you need to choose the highest quality available. You need to freeze it properly and know that some foods don't freeze well. I often tell people like cheese, butters, things like that. Butter's okay, but some things you're not going to like the texture after you've froze it. So I always tell people start small, try to freeze a couple things, and then keep them in there and see how they turn out, in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. And if you don't like it, then you might choose a different type of food preservation than freezing. So freezer packaging is super important. So what do you need for quality freezer packaging? You need moisture vapor resistant containers and wraps. This allows the smells, the scents of the food to stay within there, and no moisture to come in or out of the package. They need to be durable and leak proof. Some containers, I don't know about you, but my mother and my grandmother used to like to use those butter containers and things like that. They're not made to be put in the freezer. I often see people using the one-time water bottles and freezing those. And sometimes they bulge and crack because they were not designed to be frozen. They can become brittle and crack at those lower temperatures. The vapor moisture resistant also protects foods from absorbing off flavors and odors. I don't know if you've ever had anything come out of the freezer and you're like, boy, my chocolate chip cookie dough now kind of tastes like peppers or something different, because that moisture vapor resistant barrier was not there. And you also want them to be easy to seal and mark. So when you pull it out, this was my beef stew, or maybe this was my apple pie filling. Which was this? And I always tell people, when you go to look at freezer containers, look for the words freezer. If you look over at these images, press and seal freezer, Reynolds wrap freezer, Glad freezerware, that means they resist the cracking. They provide that moisture vapor resistant. And I also put on here canning jars. A lot of individuals think that canning jars can always be used for freezing, and that's not the case. Particularly, you can only use wide mouth canning jars. You can't use the regular mouth because they will expand and crack. You also want to look, many of the canning jars that are able to be frozen will have a line on it that says freezer. And you cannot fill past that point, because as the food expands, it'll push that glass and it could break it. So always check to make sure your containers are tempered for the freezer and can provide that moisture vapor resistant barrier. Also keep in mind the length of storage. So the duration that you can store food depends on the temperature of the cold storage. If you have a 0 or below, which is pretty hard to do, but you can get into the negatives, you can store it up to 1 year in those deep freezes. If it's a 5 to a 10%, it can be stored for several months. Fahrenheit, sorry. If it's a 10 degree to 15 degree Fahrenheit, it can be stored for several weeks. And from 15 degrees to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 days. So some of our home refrigerators and freezers, their temperatures don't get to 0. They're between the 5 and the 15. So keep that in mind when you're freezing food, that it really is important to know what temperature is your cold storage at. One of the last methods and the newest methods available to home consumers, which we didn't used to have before, but now they are on the market, are home freeze drying. So when you're looking at freeze dryers and freeze dryer science, the first step in it is that you're going to freeze to a negative 40 degrees or colder. The chamber in these devices becomes a vacuum, so the food sublimates. It changes state from one to another. So it goes from a solid to a gas. Then in the third step, the food dries completely. And then you take it and you put it into oxygen-proof packaging. Oftentimes you'll put in little oxygen absorbers in there. And it keeps that food freeze-dried for up to, sometimes they say 2 and 3 years. In home food preservation, we still say 1 year. But it's super important to note with freeze drying that it does not kill pathogens. They actually can stay dormant for longer periods of time. And oftentimes they've used this method when they, in science, to preserve samples such as blood, human tissues, things like that, then be able to reactivate. And so those pathogens are not dead. So it's super important when you do freeze drying. If you're freeze drying anything like eggs or meat, if it wasn't cooked to the correct temperature, then when you reconstitute it, you must cook it to the correct temperature for food safety. So what can be freeze dried? Dairy products, avocados, meats, vegetables, candy, whole meals, and desserts. What cannot be freeze dried? Things with really high oil or fat content, like butters, peanut butters, cream, unless it's part of a soup, sometimes you can. Foods with a naturally high sugar content, such as honey, syrup, or jams. And oftentimes baked goods like breads, cakes, and muffins don't freeze dry well. And you're not supposed to freeze dry any bone-in meat. So if you are going to freeze dry meat, you do have to remove the bone. So now that we've gone over the basics of food preservation and the different types, I really want to emphasize that it's super important that you use research-based information and resources. So here's a couple examples. In our program, we use, of course, our UI publications like the one on the right here. And if you'll see, it's called a PNW, a Pacific Northwest publication, because Oregon State, Washington State, and University of Idaho specialists and educators went together to produce this. And there's lots of extension publications throughout the US, and they're all based in valid, reliable, research-based information that's been tested. And we know that those critical temperature points, those pH levels, those water activity levels, all those things are being met in the information and in the recipes provided in these publications. The other two publications we use are the Complete Guide to Canning, the USDA Complete Guide to Canning. I tell people this is the encyclopedia of canning. Anything you want to know about home food preservation and canning is in that book, and it's available online at these resources, as well as the Ball Blue Book. And this is the new Ball Blue Book that's out. And then there's also the National Center for Home Food Preservation. That's my go-to. It's housed by the University of Georgia, but it does warehouse all the extension publications on food preservation and food safety throughout the US. So these are all valid and reliable research-based information. That means the information's been tested. It's based on the science and the safety that we know is required for safe home food preservation products. And I really recommend to people that you use one of these sources and that you just don't go out to the internet and grab whatever, because you don't know what that information has been based on and if it's rooted in sound, tested, and reliable science and information. Last but not least, you guys can always reach out to these extension offices here in Ada County, Canyon County, Owyhee County, and Payette County. We have volunteers that are certified in food safety. We have educators like myself. So feel free to reach out if you have any more questions on food safety or food preservation. We also have our Preserved in Idaho Food Safety Facebook, which I encourage you to follow. We have lots of fun, up-to-date, valid, reliable information and recipes that are on that Facebook.
Well, thank you so much, Bridget. That was really a great overview and really helpful to review some of the different methods and why they are effective at preserving food. I love getting into the science of that. So thank you all so much for viewing this webinar today. I don't see any active questions. And so just feel free to reach out to us. You know, Idaho Farmers Market Association is here to help you troubleshoot, to help advocate for you, and to really be a source of information. And University of Idaho has been a strong partner with the association from the beginning, helping to grow new farmers, to help your food producers and your vendors. And so I think we make a good team. I want to thank Melissa for helping us to organize and promote this webinar. And yeah, please reach out to us if you have any questions. Even if you're viewing this webinar and it's been, you know, some time since it was presented, we're here. We're happy to help, and happy preserving. And to those of you that are wrapping up your market seasons, I hope it was a great market season. And we look forward to seeing you in the spring when we unroll our, you know, our spring kind of market manager boot camps and training. So thank you for attending, and have a lovely rest of your week.